of school. Had to be kind of good. Mine was good. No school was great. You did. I go to Brahms a lot. Okay, well, I'm so glad to see you guys here this week. We missed you guys last week because we didn't get to see you and it was no fun. I'm glad, oh, thank you. That's so nice. I'm glad you guys came. So, do you remember for the past, 3 or 4 weeks, what we talked about? Salvation. Amos is listening. So proud. Okay, we've been talking about salvation. And, you guys know what salvation is now. Or you should if you were listening. But I just can't seem to get away from it. So today we're not talking about salvation exactly. We're going to talk about transformation. We're going to talk about what happens after you get saved. So if you guys remember, every single time I came up here, we talked about salvation, and I asked you guys if anyone in here wanted to be saved. Do you remember if anybody came up? Nobody came up? Right. Nobody came up. And you know what? You guys can make your own decisions. It's your decision, right? But I'm going to talk about it some more until you actually understand what it means. So, it's important to talk about what happens after you get saved. Or, I would say what's supposed to happen after you get saved. So I'm going to read Romans 12:2, and this is the New Living Translation because that's my favorite one. It says, "Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect." Amen. Now, there's a word in there that we hear all the time that we can't be. What word is that? Perfect. We hear all the time we can't be perfect, and that's the truth. None of us can be perfect. So why is it in there? But when you make the decision to let Jesus come into your life and change everything, that's what's supposed to happen. Your life is supposed to turn towards the good, towards the pleasing, and towards the perfect. Everything is supposed to change. Have you guys ever heard stories from people that say they got saved and then in a snap, everything was different? I've heard tons of stories. People were alcoholics and they got saved and never had to have a drink again. Or they wanted to quit smoking and they got saved and they never smoked again. Or anything like that. But how many of you guys have also heard of stories where it takes people some time to get through those things? I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that if it's taking us a little bit of time to get through something, that we're failing. And things happen differently for different people. And sometimes we can get discouraged when things in our lives aren't changing as quickly as we thought they should. More often than not, our transformation is going to be a process. Because I don't know about you guys, but I'm nowhere near perfect right now. And it'd be kind of creepy a little bit if everybody, the snap of a finger, everybody was how would you have a testimony to help someone through something? Or how would you know how to lead someone to Jesus if all of a sudden God wiped everything away for you? You didn't have to go through anything, you didn't have to learn anything. Our process of transformation starts with the changing of our minds. When our minds are changed, our priorities change, and when our priorities change, our actions change. So, when we get saved, what's the number one thing that's supposed to happen? Do you guys remember? What are you asking for when you get saved? It's not a trick question, I promise. Forgiveness, right? Who are you asking to forgive you? Jesus. So what are you asking Jesus to do? You're asking asking Jesus, exactly. You're asking Jesus to come inside of your heart, right? When we say that, that sounds a little bit weird. But what that really means is putting Jesus at the number one of your priorities list. That means inviting Jesus into your life. Because we sing these songs all the time. We sing Reckless Love. Talks about Jesus is constantly chasing after us, right? So it's not that we have to send him a written invitation and hope he accepts it and wait for him to come. No, we just make the decision to move him to the top of the list, to invite him into our lives, and he's already there. I say that all the time. No matter where you go, you don't even have to turn around, and he's there. So our minds are changed, and our priorities change. When our priorities change, our actions change. How many of you guys, if you guys have been saved, how many of you guys have found that once you got saved and you went back to your normal lives, you felt a little bit different about what you were doing before? It could be small things, maybe the way you talk, maybe some of the words you say, you felt differently about them. It could be bigger things, like running around with the wrong crowd that commits crimes or whatever, feeling bad about those things that before you didn't really care about, before you didn't really think about them. When you put Jesus at the top of your list, everything else moves around. Some things fall off. He comes in and he rearranges your entire priorities list in a transformation. So when Jesus is the center of our lives, when we allow him to be, we begin to turn into the kinds of people we were created to be. So the scripture I read before that says, then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. God's will is good and pleasing and perfect. And when we invite Jesus into our lives begin to turn good and pleasing and perfect. The key is, though, this is the important part, this happens after salvation. This is not before you ask Jesus into your life. This is after you've committed to follow Jesus and ask him into your life. Only then can he come into your life and change it. Sometimes we get caught up in the thought that we're not good enough for God and that we have to be better in order to be loved and accepted by him. And no matter how many times you hear that that's not true, you still think it. It still comes into your mind. Like, I'll get saved when I stop doing this. Or, I'll invite Jesus into my life when I'm better. Or when I'm not doing this or that, or when I'm not hanging out with these people, or when I turn 18 years old, I'll accept Jesus into my life. But that's not what it's supposed to be. Jesus wants us to come to him just as we are. Everything that we have and everything that we don't have, he wants us to come to him. We make that big decision. We make the decision to say, yes, I want Jesus to be number one in my life. I want him to live inside of me and show me the way I should go. And he does the rest. Now, that doesn't mean, whenever I say Jesus does the rest, it doesn't mean that automatically everything's changed and different and perfect. Sometimes that can happen. He can do whatever he wants. Sometimes that can happen. But most of the time, we still have to work for it. The cool thing about our end of the deal is that once we make the decision to follow Jesus, the rest of those decisions are so much easier. Because when you make the decision to follow Jesus and you put him as number one in your life and you trust him and you trust where he's taking you, you don't even have to question where you're going. Amen. You don't have to question which step to take. And we talked about this before, if you guys remember when I talked about doubt, that sometimes you are going to question where you're going and sometimes you need to question so you can get answers. Do you remember when we talked about that? But the cool thing is that you don't have to. Because Jesus is always going to be there to take care of you. God wants us to come as we are. That's the most important part. Amen. It's not easy, and it takes time, and it takes dedication.
That's right.
Dedication being number one. If you're not sold out to Jesus, which means if you don't trust where he's taking you, it's going to be hard. And you're probably going to quit. That's what happens to so many of us. Because I think a lot of times we do a disservice when we say, ask Jesus to come into your heart and everything is going to be better. And that's true to an extent. 100%. If you get saved, everything is going to be better. Everything's going to be different. But that doesn't mean everything is going to be easy. And we equate those two things in our minds. I know we do. And when people say that everything is going to be better, that's what they mean. They mean that Jesus makes your life worth living and that everything that Jesus can give you is more than anything the world can give you or any person can give you. That's what they mean. But when we tell people that, they think all their troubles are going to disappear. And they're not going to have to work for it. Because that's what we want, right? I know it sounds a lot more appealing to say that Jesus is going to come into your life and everything is going to be the perfect life. Every step you take is going to be floating off the ground. You're going to get everything handed to you. You're never going to have to work a day in your life. That sounds very appealing. I don't blame people for wanting that to be it. But it's not. We still have to live life. Life still happens to us. But I can't imagine life happening to me and not having Jesus.
Amen.
To help me with it. I can't imagine going through life and not knowing that I have a purpose. That's why so many of us fall into so many different things and do things that we know we shouldn't be doing and run with people we know we shouldn't be running with because we don't know who we are. I am who you say I am. That's what that song is about.
Amen.
God tells us who we are. We're his children and we have a purpose. We are chosen. You can have no transformation without Jesus. And we have to remember that that's the correct order. I think a lot of times we want to say, once my life is fixed, Jesus can be number one. Maybe even we're saved. And we say, okay, great. Now, Jesus, I need you. Here's my list of things that I need you to fix. And then if you can do that, then I will trust you enough you can be number one. That doesn't work either. There's an order of things. When Jesus is in your heart, he should be number one. And that's probably, for me at least, putting Jesus as number one is the hardest. Because how many of you guys are like me and you think you have to do everything on your own and make all your decisions all on your own? I find it hard to trust something that I can't see. Faith is really hard for me. That's why it's Olivia's middle name and not mine. It's not. I have a lot of hope. Don't have a lot of faith. It's very difficult. But that's what I'm working on. That's what putting Jesus first does. So it grows your faith and it grows your trust. And it allows you to go places and do things that you never thought you were going to be able to do. It turns you into the type of person that you did not think you would ever be. We have to choose to follow Jesus. If we don't choose to follow Jesus, then nothing that I say up here, or that Pastor Jeff says, or that Sister Kim tells you, or that any person tells you about Jesus, nothing else matters if you haven't chosen to follow him.
Amen. Amen.
There's no point in being here and listening to us come up here and talk about whatever we talk about if you haven't accepted Jesus into your heart.
Amen.
There's no point.
Amen. Amen.
The whole point of this life is to live for Jesus. And how can you do that if you haven't made the decision?
Amen.
He gave us free will. Have you guys heard that before? Free will, which means you get to decide. Sometimes, I wish I didn't have free will, be a lot easier. But we have to decide to follow Jesus, to make him number one. And I'm not saying it's an easy decision, but I am saying that after you make that decision, that's the first step for the rest of your life with Jesus. The rest of your life with church and ministry. The rest of your life with your careers, your future families, your current families. Choosing to follow Jesus is the start of your transformation. And I promise you, if you choose to follow Jesus, there will be a transformation.
Amen.
And that's why we're here. Because sometimes it's frustrating when things in your life don't seem to be changing, don't seem to be moving. It's frustrating when you've chosen to follow Jesus, but everyone around you has not made that decision. And it's hard to be the one person that's different. That's why you guys come here on Wednesdays. That's why we pick you up or you're dropped off or hard skipping. We pick you up or you're dropped off because we want to talk to you. We want to make sure you're okay. We want to know about your lives. And not just the teenagers, the adults too. That's why we come to church. We want to learn more about Jesus. We want to learn more about each other, and we want to help each other. We want to walk with each other in this thing. Because it helps a lot more when you know you're not alone in it.
Amen.
So, in closing, I'm going to ask you guys again, if there's anyone in here who is not saved, who has not made that decision, now's the time that you can come up and we can talk. And you can choose to follow Jesus. That's the thing. With choosing to follow Jesus, you get to choose. I'm going to give you guys everything I got. Everything I've learned about salvation, everything I read about salvation, everything I believe about salvation. I'm going to let you guys know, because that's my job. Your job is to decide whether or not you want to believe it and accept it. I pray that you do. But it's your decision.